The entire base exploded, everything is on fire.
February 24th. UAF paratroopers are entering Crimea.
It's very scary.
The military airfields Kacha and Belbek have been blown up. The occupiers' tactical aviation is burning.
We were told to gather our documents. There might be an evacuation. Shells that are being loaded into the planes are exploding. Since they're lying there in a chaotic manner, it's unclear. They could fly anywhere, basically.
The armed forces of Ukraine are preparing a naval landing in occupied Crimea and a massive attack on the Kerch Bridge.
No one's allowed near there, not anyone. No use putting it out.
An airfield. This isn't a small town, it's an airfield.
In short, it's completely destroyed.
The entire expanse of the night sky suddenly lit up with a brilliant glow.
Trump is ready to deliver Tomahawk and Barracuda missiles. Their targets are Moscow and St. Petersburg, military facilities, oil refineries, and electrical substations.
The entire plant is burning down. The fire is already out of control. There isn't a single fire truck on the premises. Everyone has evacuated from there. All the hoses and everything else there have burned up.
Moscow and St. Petersburg, get ready. Expect real, large-scale blackouts, fuel shortages, and a harsh winter. At the same time, oil refineries have been attacked, disabling more than 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity. Losses are estimated at over $100 billion. Russia is going through it, an energy and fuel collapse. And Crimea is being prepared for deoccupation. Yeah, not too hard.
I'm just curious, why exactly are you getting so incredibly jumpy and nervous all of a sudden?
Right now, we barely made it out alive. There's a fire there. We'll discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Breaking news, friends. The military airfields in Crimea, Kacha, and Belbek are on fire right now. Explosions.
Something's going on there.
There's an airfield there. Damn.
I freaked out.
Most of the tactical aviation has been put out of action, according to public sources.
Something's burning in the center.
We're preparing for the deoccupation of the peninsula, according to Sky News. This is the objective of the military operations. The republics attacked the Azot plant in Permkrai and Osknefteoksyntez in the Orenburg region of Russia. Ukraine may be supplied with long-range Tomahawk and Barracuda missiles, and with their help, now not only frontline targets are under attack, but also key military objectives. The heart of Russia, Moscow, St. Petersburg. Get ready, seriously. Massive blackouts, fuel shortages, and a harsh winter await the racists.
The kokos have struck. There's no electricity here at all.
At the same time, the attacked refineries have already put more than 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity out of commission. Losses are estimated at $100 billion.
Yeah, fucking oil depot, damn it.
Russia is essentially experiencing an energy and fuel crisis. Let's discuss the details with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetanov. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you, I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, let's start with the occupied Crimea. First of all, there is information from Sky News that the armed forces of Ukraine are preparing brilliant special operations under the occupation of the peninsula. This article came out today, I read it, and right away, military airfields in Crimea are burning, Kacha and Belbek. There are reports of strikes. They say both the long-range Neptune is in action and drones are working. What can you say about this?
Regarding the deoccupation of Crimea, we have been saying for several years that the most optimal option for us is to begin the deoccupation of our territory precisely with Crimea. Crimea is an operational geographic cauldron squeezed between two seas, the Azov and the Black Sea. The entry and exit are under our control, as is the Kerch Bridge. If it is destroyed, then basically the only way to get into Crimea would be either by sea, which is very problematic, or through land crossings that are completely under our control, because the range there is about 100 kilometers. We can reach it from both sides. We have the means to reach it. That is by itself. Crimea is practically begging to be deoccupied, and what's most interesting is that this can be done without ground operations. Without ground or naval operations, meaning without an amphibious landing, without losses. We can deoccupy it by destroying or driving out, pushing out the Russian troops. That is what deoccupation means. With long-range strike capabilities, but they must be available in sufficient quantity. The main component is aviation, which is used in this millennium to carry out combat missions. It is precisely this that will allow us to drive out the Russian troops or destroy them, depending on their willingness to die. Let's put it that way. It's not for nothing that we've been telling the Russians for several years now that they need to learn how to leave Crimea using freestyle, breaststroke, and dog paddle. How long has it been now? About 3 years we've been talking about this with you. Well, it's definitely the 4th year now. So now we have such an opportunity, and the actions of our special services to destroy the enemy's air defense systems. This is exactly what indicates that preparations are underway for a serious attack on Crimea. And it's about the same without geopolitics or politics, just a purely technical aspect, like Mossad, or rather the Israeli IDF struck Iran. I'll say it again, without geopolitics, it's purely a technical mechanism. They took out the Iranian air defense, and after that, over a distance of 1,000 kilometers, while for us it's only 300, over 1,000 kilometers, their aircraft had to refuel. But we don't need refueling. They entered Iranian territory just as we can enter the airspace, aviation, the airspace of Crimea, and then use free-falling high-precision aerial bombs and accurately guided missiles to take out targets. Ground targets, just as was done, for example, against Iranian military facilities after achieving air superiority over 1,000 kilometers away. You just need an airbase nearby. So this is an operation that can be carried out exactly as before. There's nothing new to invent. Everything was already thought up 100 years ago at the dawn of aviation. So such a mechanism is possible under occupation as well. Specifically in Crimea, Iran, the Iranians are still primarily a land-based country. And that's why there is no shared border with Israel, so there was no ground operation. And in principle, it wasn't necessary. We have the same situation, but for us, it's much simpler. The Russians will have to flee because Crimea, once again, is an operational geographic trap. They will have to run from there or simply perish. Everything will depend on the amount of strike capabilities. Today, we struck Belbek and Kacha, which are Western airfields. The Russians have 5 such airfields that they use in Crimea. 5, 2 of them have already been hit more than once. Why? Because it is precisely these airfields that the Russians use to deploy anti-aircraft missile systems and radio technical troops radars. In other words, the eyes of Russian air defense begin here. The first eye, roughly speaking, is Kacha. The last eye is the Kerch Bridge, if you stretch it out. That's basically how it is. So, strikes on Kacha, on Belbek, and on the neighboring airfields. This is the beginning of gaining air superiority, which will now be carried out by our special services, special operations forces, unmanned systems forces. In other words, the defense forces of Ukraine. When the actual air attack on Crimea happens, it will have to involve missiles, meaning fairly maneuverable missiles. Ours will work very well and not just the long-range ones. Neptune has a range of 280 kilometers. It can reach at least the middle of Crimea and, depending on the launch point, almost all the way to Kerch. This is the basic Neptune, as it's called, which we have in sufficient quantity, coastal missile systems. This is our missile, which has been performing combat missions for more than a year, since 2018. The long-range Neptune is possible. That is, with a slightly greater range, it can reach up to 1,000 kilometers into the Caucasus. If that happens, that's the direction it would go. Aviation components. We already have a second brigade of F-16s coming in. 2 brigades of F-16S are enough to carry out a military operation, an air operation, I mean, using airstrike assets, missile and bomb strikes without ground or naval operations. So let's wait. That is, when the planes arrive, along with the planes, that's the platform. We need a sufficient amount of weaponry to carry out such an attack, because as soon as we're ready, the main thing is that the Russians are ready. I'll say it again, freestyle, breaststroke, dog paddle.
Roman Grigorievich, well, for some reason, Sky News wrote that before winter, Ukraine might carry out a large-scale attack on Crimea. This could be, quote, either a naval landing by Ukrainian forces or a massive attack on the Kerch Bridge. What do you think?
Well, I would argue about the naval part. Why? A naval landing is possible in 3 locations, realistically, in order to accomplish a specific task. And based on the capabilities we have, that's not Crimea. That's the Kerch, that's the Kinburn Spit, the Tendros Spit, and Skadovsk, the port of Skadovsk. But all of that is still the coast of the Black Sea, southern Ukraine. In other words, this is the mainland coast, basically the left bank of the Dnipro. In principle, during an amphibious landing, the objective of any landing operation, not just amphibious, but also airborne ground, any kind of landing, is to seize, that is, to make a rapid advance by various means, capture and hold a position until the main forces arrive, some kind of bridgehead. As for Crimea, if you try to land an amphibious assault there, that's basically sending people to their deaths. So Obviously, no one is going to do that because ground forces definitely won't be able to approach, since it would still take another 6 months to a year of working on Crimea with airstrikes. But for example, the Kinban Spit, the Tendrivska Spit, and Skadovsk, that's a port. By the way, that's 50 kilometers from Crimea. So for example, carrying out a combat mission of an amphibious landing in the port of Skadovsk and hold it until the main forces arrive, which, for example, would cross the Dnipro from Kherson and not Oleshki. And basically, by the direct road, there's a straight road through Holopristan. They would reach Skadovsk, cut off this triangle almost along the left bank of the Dnipro, and it would be possible to hold it. So in this scenario, there are possibilities. Yes, this is the direction toward Crimea, but it's not Crimea itself. That's why with the naval landing, our partners, the journalists, were a bit hasty, to put it mildly, but the Kerch Bridge, its liberation needs to begin. Liberation. Why the Kerch Bridge? Because it is precisely that logistical chain through which 30% of military ammunition and equipment passes via Crimea. To Kherson and to the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia fronts, it's clear that we need it, but first of all, it's difficult to do because of the mines. Why not? Well, there is a numerous and uneven defense system. Practically all our missiles, all our efforts are intercepted. It needs to be taken out with ballistic missiles. There should be enough Grom missiles, several dozen Groms. Grom-1, Grom-2, it doesn't matter depending on the range. 300 kilometers is basically possible. That's the only way to break through and push past the Russian air defense, specifically over Moscow and the Kerch Bridge.
Roman Gorko, when it comes to military airfields, Kacha and Belbek, is the enemy's tactical aviation currently stationed there? In what numbers? Because you and I don't know, we discuss strikes on Kacha and Belbek almost twice a month. This happens regularly.
Those two airfields are used as forward operating bases, meaning they host tactical aviation, mainly the Russian Federation's naval aviation, and there are always army aviation units there, helicopters. Helicopters, yes, which are used to counter our drones, both surface and aerial. That is, helicopters can operate up to 1 kilometer in altitude. By the way, this is actually the only, well, not the only, but one of the main means of destruction that the Russian Federation uses against our drones, including aerial drones. There are simply a lot of helicopters. They have many, and the entire range of their helicopter fleet is army aviation. And so at forward airfields like Belbek and especially Kacha, they are stationed there. They have reloading and refueling points. In other words, a whole process. Not main bases, but as forward airfields. They fulfill their task.
Roman Grigorievich, now regarding strikes on oil refineries and others, we attacked the Azot plant in Permkrai, Ognefte, Ogsintes in Orenburg Oblast. What do you think?
Well, now we know where the Russian orcs come from Ork. Yes, from there. So our specialists have highlighted it. Here's where the Ork lair is. That is roughly in that area. But seriously, of course, we've talked about this with you before, and in principle, our listeners should be prepared for this. The next stage in destroying the Russian economy is through the destruction of the Russian chemical industry, that is the oil and gas sector. Almost all Russian chemistry, well, the kind that mainly uses gas, is tied to the oil and gas sector. So why are they now targeting the chemical industry, for example? And even our drones are flying there for about 1,500 kilometers. But the main goal, first of all, is to try to completely destroy this plant. There is such a possibility. Take the plant that was hit, the Perm plant. Besides producing ammonia and so on, it also produced ammonium nitrate. It is used in production. Ammonium nitrate goes into the manufacture of explosives and in large quantities. For us, it is very important to take Chemprom out of this equation to prevent Russian, frankly, gunpowder factories from producing explosives. So ammonium nitrate, among other things, also explodes very well. If anyone remembers, a few years ago in Lebanon, in Beirut, there was an explosion of ammonium nitrate, Russian, by the way. At that time, a Russian ship had arrived there. It was either docked or unloading. Well, in any case, suddenly it exploded, as they say. So this kind of sudden explosion can be organized at any chemical plant that produces ammonium nitrate. That is, and this Perm plant was producing it. Well, and the Omsk plant, that's basically, you could say, oil refining. Mainly it's gasoline, diesel, and aviation kerosene. For us, this Orsk plant is very important. And the next one after it, if you go further east, about 3,000 kilometers, is the Omsk plant, the oil refinery. So that's the Orsk plant from which the Orsk people come. That's Orsk, yes. And further on below Kazakhstan, yes, that's Omsk. So in Omsk, there is an oil refinery, the largest in Russia, with an annual processing capacity of 21 million tons. That means it's serious money, which we definitely need to get to stop this oil refining. Yes, part of it processes Kazakh oil, but nevertheless, the money comes from the processing, so we need to reach it. Well, since they made it to Orsk, I think they'll reach Omsk too.
Roman Igorovich, according to the dry statistics, analysts write that the attacked refineries have already put more than 40% of Russian oil refining capacity out of commission, and they estimate the losses at over 100 billion. But when I talk to economists, they look at me and say Putin doesn't care. The population might have to stand in line for gasoline. The queues could be enormous. There could be a fuel and energy crisis. They'll get through it. This will not affect Russia's ability to conduct military operations against Ukraine in any way. Roman Lvovich, I would like to discuss this with you.
Well, putting pressure on Russian civil society definitely won't have any effect, and Putin really doesn't care. But our goal isn't to put pressure on Russian society. As we've discussed many times before, that's a side effect, so to speak. The side effect of what? Of the fact that the main portion of fuel, which is still being produced at other plants, is going to the army. So to put it simply, just to understand the process, if a tank operator is competing with a tractor driver for diesel, the tank operator will win. Guess why? 3 tries. The tank operator has a gun on his tank, while the tractor driver at best has nothing but a fig in his pocket. So naturally, the tractor drivers are left without fuel, while the tank operators carry out their combat missions. Putin knows this perfectly well. So basically, he doesn't pay any attention to it at all. Well, only Putin and all those military types, they absolutely don't care at all about how ordinary Russian civilians are actually going to get around. That's just a minor side effect to them. Essentially turning a functional gas station into a massive empty parking lot. In other words, they are turning it into a completely useless and overcrowded impound lot. All civilian cars will come to a stop, but that won't affect the military in any way at all. In order to actually affect fuel supplies to the army, for that you need to destroy the entire, not just 40%, but the entire oil refining industry in Russia, plus cut off the flow of foreign currency. And why is that? And we keep hitting the chemical industry. Next, as we discussed before, expect more strikes on the chemical industry. Here they are, strikes on the chemical industry. Let's make a prediction. The next strikes will be on metallurgy and on Russia's energy sector, because the next stage is precisely destruction of metallurgy, which brings a significant amount of revenue to the Russian treasury, and of course the energy sector, which powers the military industry of the Russian Federation. There will definitely be strikes, 100%. This is already the 3rd stage. In order to prevent the Russian army from being supplied with fuel, it means the entire oil and gas sector of Russia needs to be taken down, plus the natural flow of this currency, petrodollars, must also be cut off so that they can't buy, as they are already starting to do now, diesel and gasoline abroad, as it's called. They are trying to buy already refined products from the Chinese and Indians made from someone else's oil, basically to bring it back in. And in order to completely stop the Russian army, the Russian economy must be brought down to zero, so that they can't even afford to buy this gasoline and diesel. After that, they will switch, as we've already said ourselves, to donkeys, which now they bleat and mumble, but they don't want to go to war. The donkeys go, but the little donkeys don't. Donkeys meaning the Russian ones, these federalists. But as for the little donkeys, that's it, they're all gone. Now, a little donkey costs more than a motorcycle. That's why now Russian bloggers and public pages are practically flooded with offers to buy motorcycles for Russian soldiers. That's about how much it costs. A bottle of water and a motorcycle. Especially in Donbass, there's no water at all there. It's not even clear what they're pouring into those bottles. That's why this process is happening. And so to stop it completely, to stop the Russian army, you need to cut off these 2 flows. That is fuel production and currency, without stopping the inflow of foreign currency. But it will be very difficult to stop the army.
Dear audience, please like this video and support our content with Roman Grigorievich. Every like from you is priceless, and in the comments, let us know where you're watching from, your viewing geography. Roman Grigorievich, you see, President Zelensky, I think it was the day before yesterday, said that if until now we have attacked Russia exclusively with Ukrainian armaments, Ukrainian weapons, now the situation may change, Zelensky said. And here 2 pieces of news emerge. First, the US is providing Ukraine with intelligence data for missile strikes deep inside Russia. That means oil refineries, pipelines, power plants, and other facilities, including those in Moscow and St. Petersburg. This is the first time that the Trump administration will be helping Ukraine carry out strikes using long-range missiles on targets deep within Russian territory. And the second piece of information is currently under consideration: the possibility of supplying Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk and Barracuda missiles. Roman Grigorievich, how would you comment on this?
There are Russian power plants, pumping stations, and pipelines. We know very well that they still exist. It is important since Soviet times to have the locations of Russian assets available in real time. Is this something Russia can share with us so that our drones can reach their targets? The drone flies, let's put it simply. How long did it take the drone to reach Orsk? That's almost over 1,500 kilometers at a speed of 150 kilometers per hour, 10 hours. So in those 10 hours, it could be shot down 300 times, and it needs to have a flight route that avoids all the strike zones, all the areas covered by Russian air defenses, which in principle aren't that many anymore if the drone has already passed through the frontline air defense. But you need to know exactly and specifically which air defense system is there and at what altitude it can engage targets. The radar beam, how to avoid it, at what speeds, at what altitudes to fly under the beam, meaning below the radio horizon. This is an entire process. And without intelligence data of this level, and the Americans see all of this, they have everything from radio reconnaissance to satellite monitoring. They can see perfectly well where and when any Russian station is turned on, how far its range is, and so on and so forth. And this data gives us the opportunity, even with our own weapons, to get through and accomplish the combat mission. Well, we've already talked about the OS, we've talked about PERM. In other words, we reach them. Now, a question about missiles. Well, I don't believe they'll give us Tomahawks. I don't believe it for one simple reason, because if they were ready to give us Tomahawks, they would have already given us JASSMs. For the F-16S that we have, they've already given us ATACMS for the HIMARS that we have. So it's more just talk, really. Technically, it's possible. It's not that it's impossible, yes. At this stage, it really is a sea-launched missile. But a few years ago, a program was launched to restore ground launches, the so-called mobile ones. A sufficient number of launchers have already been created, Typhoon. They're also called that, well, depending on how people translate it, Typhoon. These launchers make it possible to fire, that is, to launch a Tomahawk missile from this launcher. It's the same, basically, it's the same launch silo as the Mk-41 shipborne launcher. They just took it off and mounted it on a vehicle chassis, and then you can carry out the combat mission. But once again, let me repeat, why don't I believe it at this stage? Why? Because we've already been promised JASSM. We already have a second F-16 brigade, but not a single JASSM has arrived. By the way, we were given even fewer cruise missiles. This issue could have been resolved, but they're afraid. So if they're afraid, they give us JASSM, thinking that will help. But something like the Barracuda, well, it's not exactly that. You could call it a hybrid drone missile. And you
say that it's not a Barracuda?
Yes, I'm talking about the Barracuda. So the Tomahawk is still a cruise missile, medium range, and its range is about 2,000 kilometers, give or take 500, depending on the type. And the Barracuda has a range of 500 kilometers, but nevertheless, it can carry a 500 kilogram warhead. So basically, you could say it's a short range missile. Roughly speaking, the Barracuda is about the same as the Taurus. Only the Taurus costs millions of euros, while the Barracuda is several $100,000. It's simpler. Yes, it's easy to produce, meaning it can be made in large quantities, like our Polyanitsia, for example, or the same Flamingo. Although in our case, we only have some videos and teasers, that's all we've heard about them. But in reality, for example, the Barracuda is already entering production, and in half a year we could have it. But it's not like we'll get it tomorrow. It's only just starting production. We'll probably get the ERAM sooner. So there is a missile that they've basically already started producing for us, and we can get them faster. Because we're waiting, of course, for the weapons we've ordered. But it's much simpler. I've already explained this on my fingers, to just give us what we already have launches for. We have HIMARS, 50 HIMARS units, and attacks, please, 300 kilometers. The missile could already be operational. We have F-16S, already several squadrons that are carrying out combat missions. But what level of combat missions are they? They're chasing flies with fly swatters. In other words, they're using cannons, roughly speaking, against Shaheds or Garants. So if they were given the opportunity, at least 100 JASSMs to strike targets at a range of 500 kilometers. The same 500 kilometers, the same 500 kilograms warhead. And Moscow would be gone. They talk about a blackout. Imagine what a blackout in Moscow would be like. A blackout in Kyiv? Nothing terrible. A blackout in Kiev. Why is it nothing terrible? First of all, the population density is no longer the same. Some people have left. Secondly, we've already gotten used to it. We're already prepared. We know how to handle these life support issues. But Kyiv still has several times fewer people than Moscow. Imagine several tens of millions. No one even knows how many mouths there are in Moscow. Now, just imagine how many behinds there are in Moscow. And if they all go to the toilet at the same time during the day, but there's no water, no electricity, the air there will be, let's say, filled with the Russian spirit. That smell will seriously spread within a radius of about 1,500 kilometers. It'll reach us. Well, at least it'll definitely reach the Urals. In other words, it would just be a humanitarian catastrophe, and a very serious one at that. One of the ways, by the way, to kill off all the combat mosquitoes, they just die from that Russian spirit. So there would be a real problem there, and that possibility exists. If we were given those JASMs, at least 100 of them, that's the kind of Russian spirit we'd get. It would reach all the way to the Urals.
Roman Grigorievich, when Zelensky says that previously we only used Ukrainian long-range strike systems, but now that's no longer the case, I'm curious, what is he talking about? What long-range missiles does he mean? Are these European? What is President Zelensky referring to? In other words, what could reach deep into Russian territory that isn't Ukrainian?
Well, what is he talking about? This is a question that millions of people, at least Ukrainians, have been asking for several years now. So it's very difficult for me to say, to decipher it. And really, from what we might have at this stage, I've basically already mentioned it. We have, well, for example, the Storm Shadow. Storm Shadow can quickly reach as far as, say, Taganrog itself. Those that flew 300 kilometers. Well, what is 300 kilometers? Just look, a 300-kilometer range. Attack MS can reach Kursk, Tambov, Voronezh, Belgorod, and Rostov. That's 5 regional cities. That is along the transborder, or rather transfrontier, transborder cities. And that's not even mentioning Crimea. I'm talking about Russian cities here. So this is just what ATACMS can reach. If they get the PRSM, by the way, the Americans are now switching to the PRSM. It's the same launcher for HIMARS, but it holds 2 missiles. Not one ATACMS, but 2 missiles in the PRSM block. It has a range of 500 kilometers. It can reach Moscow. So how do you create a blackout in Moscow? It's very simple. About 100 PRSMs, and there will definitely be a blackout. And that's not even mentioning the JASMs that could be dropped from the same platforms, F-16s. So this is what could really help us a lot, not to mention the Scalps, Storm Shadows, or for example, the Tauruses. There's a lot that can be said about the Tauruses. The question now is, well, Tauruses, for now, not a single one of our planes can carry them. The F-16 can't carry them either. The Gripen can carry them. So not ruling out the possibility that with incoming Gripens, even just a pair of planes, though usually they transfer them in groups of 4, then we might also get Tauruses. That's also a range of 500 kilometers. So that means Moscow as well. So we're waiting, and maybe later we'll understand what our great leaders are talking about.
As you always say about the Moscow bathhouse. Hello, Roman Igorovich. So let's talk about drones over the territory of the European Union and NATO countries. So for the first time, 15 drones were detected at night in Belgium over a military base. Airports were shut down. Then drones appeared in Munich. Everyone was in shock. Civil aviation, airports temporarily suspended their operations. The plan, the carpet. Then at Valdai, Putin is asked, well, as they say, Vladimir Vladimirovich, how long are you going to keep launching drones? He says, there will be many of them, but you understand, it's not us, it's over there. The guys are just messing around. And in this way, essentially, Putin announced that a huge number of drones will be roaming the expanses of the countries of the North Atlantic Alliance. Roman Lenkovich, what does this indicate from a military point of view?
Well, in Belgium, for example, there is probably also some pressure, more economic, let's say. Why? Because Belgium holds the main Nabulina reserves, right? Those securities that she placed there, about 200 billion euros. Our person specifically, we've already talked about Nabulina. Is she really Tatar? She's actually pure-blooded Ukrainian. How much did she have to help us, huh? That's one. So that's probably one of the reasons why they're flying over Belgium. A purely military reason. There's a base in Belgium where American nuclear weapons are stationed. Among NATO countries, there are a few that have their own nuclear weapons. Those are France, Britain, and the United States. About 150 American nuclear warheads are also stationed in 5 other countries. In Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and Turkey. And so naturally, there's a base in Belgium, and that's why the Russians, of course, will now be trying, at the very least, to somehow find some way to approach these bases, among other things. The flights of these drones are not so harmless. Not so harmless. This is not a provocation. This is already combat. This is the execution of a combat mission. What do the drones do? They create what is called a digital map of the area, approaching certain targets, and begin photographing them, converting the images into digital form, which can then be uploaded into missiles, into guidance systems, into onboard memory. The missile. Who has heard of what machine memory is? Well, these are exactly those photographs that are first taken by the same drones, then uploaded, and the missile already on the terminal phase of its trajectory when it is approaching the target. And for example, electronic warfare systems try to interfere with it to cut it off from control and communication with the satellite. But at that point, it no longer needs the connection. It doesn't need a connection to the satellite anymore if it has machine vision. That is, it's a bunch of photographs that it simply uses to approach the target. But those photos need to be taken. They need to be taken from the air, from certain angles. So what are these drones doing? Because to be honest, I don't understand why they aren't being shot down. This is preparation for serious strikes, for specific strikes, using the means of destruction that the Russians have. If we have them, like Neptune, just so you know, this information is actually available. And it also locks onto the target using exactly this kind of machine vision. Why is it that electronic warfare systems practically don't affect it? Well done, KB. Lucchini right here, and even before that. Why, for example, fight against electronic warfare? For what purpose? If you can just disconnect from the satellite altogether and carry out the combat mission in exactly this way. It's just a somewhat different approach using different frequencies. There's a long wave that's typically used and a different set of these digital photos as well. But nevertheless, that's basically the principle at work here. That's why Europeans shoot down everything that buzzes, especially over military sites. Otherwise, something will buzz over you later that you won't be able to handle.
Friends, please like this video and write in the comments if you would like a service to support our tandem. Roman Grigorievich and I meet 3 times a week to discuss key military and political topics. Roman Grigorievich is our military analyst, sometimes a psychologist, and sometimes even a psychiatrist when he evaluates the actions of the racists and Putin. But we always provide clear analysis. The well-known military analyst Roman Svetlan, Roman Grigorievich, thank you very much. And as usual, see you again on Monday.
Goodbye.